You don't like Donald Trump, do you?
I don't respect the manner in which he has carried out the presidency.
Okay. You despise Donald Trump, don't you?
No.
You just can't bring yourself to say that he didn't violate the law?
No.
Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court?
I was
mean,
appointed.
that determined, isn't it a court of final jurisdiction decides what's constitutional and not? In fact, aren't most acts of Congress presumed to be constitutional?
They are presumed, but they're not always constitutional. And no, of course, I was not on the Supreme Court. And I can tell you, Senator, look, we really wrestled over this decision. I personally wrestled over this decision. And it was not one that I took lightly at all. But it was because I took my responsibility seriously as acting Attorney General.
I believe you believe what you're saying.
Yes.
Have you ever watched someone walk into a hearing completely confident, only to realize they're defending a position they can't fully justify? That's exactly what happened when former acting Attorney General Sally Yates squared off with Senator John Kennedy. She insisted she had every right to reject President Trump's executive order because she believed it was unconstitutional. But Kennedy wasn't interested in her personal opinion. He wanted one simple answer. Who actually gets to decide what's constitutional? What followed turned into a tense back and forth that had the entire room hanging on every word. At first, it sounds like a routine legal disagreement. Yates argues she was simply following her duty and refusing to defend an order she believed violated the Constitution. But Kennedy keeps pressing the same point from different angles, refusing to let her dodge the core issue. Then he delivers the question that completely shifts the momentum. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court? Suddenly, the discussion isn't just about one executive order anymore. It becomes a debate over who has the authority to interpret the Constitution, the limits of executive power, and whether personal legal judgment can override decisions that courts have not yet made. Just when that exchange ends, Kennedy pivots to Russia's election interference and pushes for another series of direct answers. Stay until the end because this hearing escalates from a constitutional debate into a broader discussion about government power and accountability.
For this one.
Ms. Yates, Dr. Clapper, thank you both for your years of service to the American people. Ms. Yates, I want to start with you. You declined to support, to defend President Trump's executive order because you thought it was unconstitutional. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And you believe you believe that no reasonable argument could be made in its defense. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know that I would put it in that way, Senator. This was the analysis that we went through.
Okay. Let me stop you because I've got a whole bunch of questions.
Okay.
I just want to understand your thinking from my perspective.
Sure.
Did you believe then that there were reasonable arguments that could be made in its defense?
I believed that any argument that we would have to make in its defense would not be grounded in the truth. Because to make an argument in its defense, we would have to argue that the executive order had nothing to do with religion, that it was not done with an intent to discriminate against Muslims.
Okay.
And
So
based on a variety of
factors. You were looking at intent?
Yes, and I believe that that's the appropriate analysis. And in fact, that's been borne out in several court decisions since that time, that that's the appropriate analysis when you're doing a constitutional analysis. It's to look to see what are you trying to accomplish here.
Okay. Suppose instead of an executive order, this had been an act of Congress, would you have refused to defend it?
If it were the same act, yes. Okay. And in fact, the Department of Justice has done that in the past. For example, with DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, when the Department of Justice refused to defend DOMA.
But that was a political decision, was it not?
Well, I wasn't at Main Justice at that time, so I can't speak to that, but that was another example of when DOJ did not defend the constitutionality of a statute in that sense.
But in your opinion, the executive order is unconstitutional?
I certainly was not convinced that it was constitutional, and given that I wasn't in the import of this, I couldn't in good conscience send Department of Justice lawyers in to defend it.
Well, I want to be sure I understand. Do you believe it's constitutional or unconstitutional?
I believed I was not convinced that it was constitutional. I believed that it was unconstitutional in the sense that there was no way in the world I could send folks in there to argue something that we didn't believe to be the truth.
So you believe it's unconstitutional?
Yes.
Okay. I don't mean to wax too metaphysical.
And if I can say, I can understand why you might be a little frustrated with the language
I'm
here.
not frustrated. I'm happy as a clam.
No, and here,
Point does an act of Congress or an executive order become unconstitutional?
well, it all depends on what the act does.
No, but I mean, at what point is it become? I can look at a statute and say, I think that's unconstitutional. Does that make it unconstitutional?
I think the issue that we faced at the Department of Justice is to defend this executive order would require lawyers to go in and argue that this has nothing to do with religion.
But at what point does a statute or an executive order become unconstitutional? Is it some a priori determination? It becomes, I mean, what I'm telling you what I'm getting at, and I don't mean any disrespect. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court?
I was
mean,
appointed.
that determined, isn't it a court of final jurisdiction decides what's constitutional and not? In fact, aren't most acts of Congress presumed to be constitutional?
They are presumed, but they're not always constitutional. And no, of course, I was not on the Supreme Court. And I can tell you, Senator, look, we really wrestled over this decision. I personally wrestled over this decision. And it was not one that I took lightly at all. But it was because I took my responsibility seriously as acting Attorney General.
I believe you believe what you're saying.
Yes, I do.
I'm just trying to understand, this is likely to come up in the future.
Well,
At what point does an executive order or statute become unconstitutional? When I think it's unconstitutional, or you think it's unconstitutional, or a court of final jurisdiction says it's unconstitutional?
I believe that it is the responsibility of the Attorney General, if the President asks him or her to do something that he or she believes is unlawful or unconstitutional, to say no. And that's what I did.
Okay, I get it. All right, let me ask you both a couple of questions. Can we agree, Director and Counselor, that the Russians attempted to influence the outcome of the election?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Yes.
Do you believe that the Russians did, in fact, influence the outcome of the election, Director?
In our intelligence community assessment, we made the point that we could not make that call. The intelligence community has neither the authority, the expertise, or the resources to make that judgment. The only thing we said was we saw no evidence of influencing voter tallies in any of the 50 states. But we were not in a position to judge what actual outcome on the election.
How about you, Ms. Yates?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that's part of the problem is we'll never know.
Okay. Have you ever heard, the Russians have been doing this for years, have they not? I'm not minimizing what they did. I think they did try to influence the election.
It's absolutely true. And as I pointed out, as I mentioned in my opening statement, sir, they've been doing this since at least the 60s.
Okay.
The difference, however, was this is unprecedented in terms of its aggressiveness and the multifaceted campaign that they mounted. That's new.
General Clapper, have you ever leaked information, classified or unclassified, to a member of the press?
Not wittingly or knowingly, as I said in my statement.
Classified or unclassified?
Well, unclassified is not leaking. Unclassified, that's somewhat of a non sequitur.
Have you ever given information to a reporter that you didn't want to have your name connected with, but you wanted to see it in the paper?
I have not. I've had many encounters with media over my career.
I'm sorry about that. How about you, Ms. Yates?
Now, other than situations where the Department of Justice would arrange, for example, for me to talk on background with reporters about a particular issue, to educate them about that, no, I've certainly never provided classified information, and that would be the only kind of background information.
Do you know?
And I've done the same.
Everyone expected another routine hearing. Instead, Senator John Kennedy put former acting Attorney General Sally Yates on the spot. Yates defended her decision not to support President Trump's executive order, saying she believed it was unconstitutional. But Kennedy kept asking one simple question. Who decides what's unconstitutional?
Not you. Not me. The Supreme Court. Yates argued that as acting Attorney General, she had a duty to refuse actions she believed violated the Constitution. Then Kennedy delivered the line that changed the room. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court? The hearing instantly shifted from politics to the limits of executive authority. But Kennedy wasn't done. He turned to Russia's election interference and asked former intelligence chief James Clapper whether Russia actually changed the outcome of the 2016 election. Clapper responded that while Russia attempted to influence the election, the intelligence community did not determine whether those efforts changed the final result. By the end, the hearing centered on two questions. Who has the final say on the Constitution? And where should executive officials draw the line when they believe a presidential action is unlawful? Watch the full exchange and decide for yourself. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know your thoughts in the comments.